3 weeks passed after the failed council meeting and the first reports started coming in from the border systems. The news was bad and getting worse every day. Human cargo ships were disappearing along the main trade routes. Colony transports, carrying families to New Worlds, were being attacked without warning. Medical supply vessels heading to refugee camps were found drifting empty in space. Kim Tai sat in his small apartment, reading the reports on his secure terminal. Each message made his jaw tighten a little more, but his face remained calm. The Maxian Crimson Fleet had attacked the passenger liner, New Sol, killing over 3,000 civilians, including women and children. The Zephyrian swarm had destroyed 2 research vessels that were carrying scientists working on new medicines for sick alien children. The encrypted messages from Earth Command kept coming. Admiral Park Jin-woo wanted to mobilize the entire battle fleet and hit back immediately. General Choi Min-soo argued for surgical strikes against enemy leadership to send a clear message, but President Yoon Hae-jin gave very specific orders. Try diplomacy one more time, but prepare for what comes next. Tae sent out requests for an emergency council session. Most of the alien governments refused to attend, claiming they were too busy with more important matters. The few species that did show up spent their time making jokes about human weakness. The Vrex ambassador actually started laughing when Tae requested peacekeeping forces to protect the human colonies. Ambassador Korax from the Zephyrian swarm clicked his mandibles in amusement as he told the council that humans should have stayed on their little blue world if they could not handle the real galaxy. His compound eyes glittered with what looked like satisfaction at human suffering. The other Zephyrians buzzed approval at his cruel words. The Granite Lord Representative General Thokmar rumbled that perhaps humans were learning valuable lessons about survival of the fittest. His rocky face showed no emotion as he described human casualties as natural selection in action. The other rock creatures laughed like landslides at what they thought was a clever joke. From the observer section, Lee Da-hai watched Tae carefully. She could see small changes that the aliens missed. His shoulders had straightened slightly into a more military posture. His breathing had become deeper and more controlled, like someone preparing for combat. His fingers were tapping that same Morse code message on the table. Target acquired. When the Void Hunter captain suggested that maybe fewer human ships should travel the dangerous space lanes since they made such tempting targets, Tae finally spoke. His voice was still quiet and diplomatic, but there was something new underneath it. He thanked the captain for his concern about human safety and said Earth would certainly take steps to protect its citizens. The captain laughed and said, protection was expensive. Maybe humans should pay tribute to ensure safe passage. The other Void Hunters joined in the laughter, thinking they had found an easy source of income. They had no idea they were talking to someone who had spent years hunting pirates and terrorists across human space. After the meeting ended with nothing accomplished, Da-hai approached Tai in the corridor. She knew about his military background, about the impossible battles he had won against overwhelming odds. She asked quietly if he needed backup or if Earth should send more diplomats or military advisors to help. He looked out the massive viewport at the stars beyond and was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. He told her that some problems could not be solved with words alone. Some enemies only understood one language. He had tried peace, offered compromise, suggested solutions that would benefit everyone. But these species saw kindness as weakness and mercy as stupidity. The attacks on human civilians continued to escalate. The colony ship Busan Hope, carrying 5,000 settlers to a new world, simply vanished near the Maxian border. Search and rescue teams found only debris and emergency beacons broadcasting final messages from terrified families. The medical transport, Mercy Wing, was found drifting with its entire crew dead and its cargo of life-saving medicines. Stolen, each report hit Tae like a physical blow, but he showed no emotion in public. He continued, attending diplomatic functions and cultural events, acting like nothing had changed. But Da-hai noticed he had started making different kinds of phone calls, not to other diplomats or government officials, but to old comrades from his military days. Late at night, when the station was quiet, Tae would contact men and women he had served with during the worst conflicts humanity had ever faced. Captain Song Hyo-jin, who had led special operations behind enemy lines, Major Lee Jun-ho, who commanded the Stealth Destroyer Squadron's Colonel Kim Min-ji, who specialized in turning enemy strengths against them. These conversations were brief and coded, but Da-hai could guess their meaning. The diplomatic phase was ending, and the real war was about to begin. The aliens thought they were fighting weak merchants and peaceful colonists. They had no idea they were about to face the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. The neutral species who had refused to help human civilians started, sending private messages asking about trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. But it was too late for that kind of diplomacy. The time for choosing sides had passed, when they chose to do nothing while human families died. President Yoon Hae-jin sent a final message to Tae through secure channels. The orders were simple and direct. No more diplomatic protests, no more requests for peacekeeping forces, no more appeals to alien sense of justice. Humanity had tried the civilized approach and been answered with murder. Now they would respond in the language their enemies understood. That night, Tae opened his personal safe and pulled out items he had not touched in years. His military medals from campaigns the aliens knew nothing about. His service pistol that had never failed him in combat. His tactical planning software that could analyze enemy weaknesses and calculate optimal strike patterns. He spent hours reviewing intelligence reports about alien military capabilities that human spies had been gathering for decades. The Maxian Crimson Fleet was powerful, but relied too heavily on direct frontal assault. The Zephyrian Swarm had superior numbers, but their hive mind made them predictable. The Granite Lords were nearly invulnerable in direct combat, but their massive size made them slow to respond to changing tactics. The Void Hunters thought they were clever predators, but they had never faced prey that could hunt back. They attacked defenseless merchant ships and unarmed colonies because they were cowards who avoided real fights. Human military records showed they always ran when facing equal opposition. As dawn broke over Council Station, Tae made one final diplomatic gesture. He sent formal messages to every government that had attacked human civilians, offering them one last chance to withdraw their forces and pay reparations for the murders they had committed. The messages were polite and professional, giving no hint of what was coming if they refused. The responses came back within hours, filled with insults and threats. The Maxian War Prince said humans could keep begging, but it would not save them. The Zephyrian hive mind buzzed that weak species deserved extinction. The Granite Lords rumbled that they would crush any human resistance like bugs under their feet. Tae read each response carefully, then deleted them from his system. He would remember the exact words when the trials began, but for now he had more important work to do. He opened a secure channel to Earth and began the conversation that would change everything. The galaxy thought the humans were defeated. They believed their own propaganda about human weakness. They had no idea that death had been taking notes, in the council chamber all along, waiting patiently for diplomacy to fail. The storm was gathering, and soon these alien bullies would learn why humanity's greatest predators had chosen to become protectors. The real war was about to begin. The galaxy's most feared predators discovered what it felt like to become prey. The Void Hunters, who had terrorized trade routes for generations, suddenly found themselves being stalked by something far more dangerous. Captain Song Hyo-jin led specialized human hunter-killer teams that had been training for this exact mission for over a decade. The Void Hunters had built their reputation on being impossible to catch. They could strike from the shadows, destroy their targets, and vanish before any response could be organized. Their ships were designed for stealth and speed. Their crews were experts at finding the perfect moment to attack when victims were most vulnerable. But humans had studied their methods for years. Every attack pattern had been analyzed. Every escape route had been mapped. Every weakness had been cataloged. Human intelligence knew where the Void Hunters would be before they knew it themselves. The hunters had become the hunted song. Hyo-jin ships looked like ordinary patrol vessels to any casual observer. But underneath the peaceful exterior were tracking systems that could follow ion trails through hyperspace for weeks. Stealth generators that could make a ship invisible to every known sensor type. Weapons that could disable rather than destroy, allowing crews to be captured for questioning. The first Void Hunter ship vanished near the Kepler system. It simply stopped responding to communications, and when other pirates went to investigate, they found the vessel, drifting empty in space. The crew was gone without any sign of struggle or violence. The ship was intact but completely abandoned. More disappearances followed across the galaxy. Void. Hunter captains would receive their last status report. Then nothing. Raiders who had terrorized merchant fleets for decades simply vanished, leaving their ships floating like ghost vessels. Some were found days later, others were never located at all. The few survivors who were eventually released told stories that terrified other pirates. They described being boarded by humans who seemed to know everything about Void Hunter technology, who moved through their ships like they had built them, who could predict every defensive measure and counter it perfectly. These humans did not kill unless they had to. Instead, they gathered information about other pirate bases, about planned attacks, about the locations of stolen goods, and captured civilians. They were methodical and professional, treating piracy as a problem to be solved rather than an enemy to be destroyed. The Void Hunter leadership tried to adapt. They changed their communication codes, altered their attack patterns, moved their secret bases to new locations. Nothing worked. The humans always seemed to be one step ahead, finding new hiding places within hours, tracking coded messages that should have been unbreakable. Fear spread through the pirate networks like a plague. Crews refused orders to attack human targets. Some abandoned piracy entirely and fled to neutral systems. Others tried to negotiate safe passage in exchange for information about their former comrades. The unity that had made the Void Hunters dangerous began to collapse. Meanwhile, the neutral species were learning that neutrality came with a price. The humans were not interested in territorial expansion or military conquest, but they were very interested in justice and accountability. Every government that had remained silent during the attacks on human civilians found their diplomatic status under review. Trade agreements that had been negotiated over decades were suddenly subject to human approval. Defense pacts that had provided security for generations were canceled without notice. The comfortable relationships that neutral species had taken for granted were now dependent on human goodwill. The Alteran Crystal Confederation discovered this when their request for medical aid was denied. The crystal plague that was killing their children could be cured by human technology. But Earth was no longer interested in helping species that had ignored human suffering. The crystals turned from their normal blue to desperate red as they realized their mistake. President Yoon Hai-jin message to the Galactic community was broadcast on all frequencies. Humanity remembered who had stood with them and who had stood aside. Friendship was a two-way relationship, and species that offered nothing when humans needed help could expect nothing when they needed help. The Vrex Dominion tried to argue that they had remained neutral in order to serve as potential mediators. They claimed they had been planning to offer assistance, but needed time to consider the complex political implications. Their snake-like representatives hissed diplomatic language about careful consideration and measured responses. The human response was delivered by Ambassador Kim Tae in his usual calm diplomatic voice. He thanked the Vrex for their thoughtful consideration and noted that humanity had also taken time to consider the implications of Vrex neutrality. The conclusion was that species who could not take a stand against genocide were not suitable partners for civilization. Similar messages went to every neutral government that had watched human colonies burn without offering assistance. The galaxy had taught humanity a valuable lesson about who their real friends were. Now humanity was returning the favor. General Choi Min-soo coordinated the systematic dismantling of hostile military capabilities. Human strike teams appeared throughout enemy territory, destroying supply depots, disabling communication networks, and capturing key personnel. The attacks were precise and surgical, designed to cripple military effectiveness without causing unnecessary casualties. The Granite Lords, who had boasted about their invincible warriors, watched their fortress worlds fall one by one. Human forces used the Granite Lords' own massive size against them. Gravity weapons made their heavy bodies impossible to move. Sonic disruptors turned their rock-hard skin into a liability rather than an asset. What frustrated the Granite Lords most was that the humans were not trying to kill them. They were being captured and held prisoner, while their military infrastructure was systematically destroyed. Their proud warrior culture meant nothing when their enemies refused to fight honorably. The few remaining Maxian fleets tried to make a final desperate stand at their home system. They gathered every available ship and prepared for a glorious last battle that would be remembered in their songs for generations. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by human vessels that demanded unconditional surrender. Admiral Park Jin-woo broadcast a simple message to the Maxian fleet. They could surrender and face trial for their crimes against human civilians, or they could fight and be destroyed. The choice was theirs, but the outcome was not in doubt. The humans had no interest in glorious battles, only injustice. Some Maxian ships tried to fight and were disabled by weapons that seemed to anticipate their every move. Others attempted to flee and discovered that human ships could track them through hyperspace. The proud, Crimson Fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was reduced to a handful of damaged vessels, limping home in defeat back on Council Station. Lee Da-hai watched Kim Tae conduct business as if nothing had changed. He still attended diplomatic receptions and cultural events. He still spoke politely to alien representatives and smiled at their attempts at conversation. But now everyone knew what lay beneath that diplomatic smile. The other diplomats avoided him like he carried some deadly disease. They whispered among themselves about the impossible human military victories, about weapons and tactics they had never seen before, about the terrifying efficiency with which humanity was dismantling its enemies. When Tae entered a room, conversations stopped. When he spoke, everyone listened with desperate attention, looking for clues about what humanity planned to do next. His every word was analyzed, his every gesture studied for hidden meanings. The quiet diplomat had become the most feared person in the galaxy. The attacks on human colonies had stopped completely. Trade routes were secure. The galaxy bullies had learned to pick on someone their own size. But the price of peace was eternal vigilance, and humanity had learned never to trust aliens who spoke of friendship while planning betrayal. The hunt would continue until justice was served. Kim Tae sat in the back row of the massive council chamber, watching the alien creatures argue like children fighting over toys. The room was huge, with walls that stretched up so high you could barely see the ceiling. Strange lights from different worlds made everything glow in weird colors that hurt human eyes. But Tae had learned to ignore the discomfort years ago. The chamber held representatives from over 200 different species. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that looking at them too long made your head spin. The Vrex delegation looked like giant snakes with arms, and they kept hissing every time someone mentioned human colonies. Their forked tongues flicked out when they got angry, which was most of the time. Near the front sat the crystal beings from Altara, who were basically living rocks that could change colors based on their emotions. Right now they were pulsing angry red because the mining guild had refused their latest demands. These creatures thought they were better than everyone else because their technology was older than most civilizations. Tae pulled out his simple black tablet and started taking notes in neat handwriting. He wrote down who was arguing with whom and what they wanted. Most of it was the same stuff they argued about every week: territory disputes, mining rights, trade route control. Everyone wanted more, and no one wanted to give anything up. The insect-like Zephyrians were clicking their mandibles together, making sounds that reminded Tae of old machinery breaking down. They had compound eyes that could see in directions humans could not even imagine. And right now, all those eyes were focused on him, with what looked like amusement. They thought humans were funny because humans always talked instead of fighting. Ambassador Corax from the Zephyrian swarm stood up on his 6 legs and pointed one of his 4 arms at Tae. The translator device made his clicks and buzzes sound like words in basic Galactic standard, but you could still hear the insect sounds underneath. He said humans were weak because they sent diplomats instead of warriors to settle disputes. The other Zephyrians clicked approval at this insult. Tae just smiled and kept writing notes. His pen moved smoothly across the tablet screen as he recorded Corax's exact words for his report to Earth Command. He had learned long ago that getting angry at alien insults was a waste of energy. Better to remember everything and use it later, when the time was right. The Granite Lords were next to speak, and when one of them stood up, the whole floor shook. These creatures were made of living rock and stood 3 meters tall with arms like tree trunks. Their leader, General Thokmar, rumbled, in a voice that sounded like landslides. He said humans were too soft for the real galaxy, where only the strong survived. Again, Tay smiled and took notes. He wrote down how Thokmar threatened human settlements, and how the other granite lords laughed at the idea of human resistance. The rock creatures believed their hard skin made them invincible in battle. They had never lost a direct fight, and they made sure everyone knew it. From her seat in the observer section, Lita Hai watched Tay carefully. She worked for Earth Intelligence and had read his real file. She knew things about Kim Tay that would make these alien bullies think twice before insulting him. But Tay kept that part of his life buried deep, where no one could see it. The truth was that before becoming a diplomat, Tai had been Captain Kim of the Human Special Forces. The small scar on his left temple came from shrapnel during the siege of Europa Station, where he held an impossible position for 3 days against enemy forces that outnumbered his unit 50-1. His calm hands that now held a pen had once operated weapons that could level city blocks. His quiet voice that spoke of peace, treaties, and trade agreements had once given orders that saved human colonies from complete destruction. The neat handwriting that filled diplomatic reports had once written tactical plans that military academies still studied as examples of perfect strategy. But none of the aliens knew this. They saw a middle-aged human in a plain black suit who spoke softly and never raised his voice. They thought diplomacy meant cowardice and talking meant weakness. The Vrex hissed with laughter when Tay suggested peaceful solutions to border disputes. The crystal beings pulsed with amused colors when he offered food aid instead of military threats. What they did not understand was that Tay had seen more real combat than most of their warriors combined. He had fought in the bloodiest battles humanity ever experienced and won them through superior tactics and unbreakable will. His unit called him Iron Kim because nothing could bend him once he decided on a course of action. During the Proxima Rebellion, he single-handedly infiltrated an enemy command center and disabled their entire communications network, allowing human forces to coordinate the attack that ended the war. His men would follow him anywhere because they knew he would die before letting them down. The Battle of Titan Base was still taught in military schools across human space. Outnumbered 10-1 with limited supplies and no hope of reinforcement, Tay held the position for 6 weeks until relief forces arrived. He lost only 12 men out of 200, while enemy casualties numbered in the thousands. But now he sat quietly taking notes while alien species that had never faced real human military might called his people weak. The Void Hunters, who specialized in attacking unarmed merchant ships, bragged about how easily they could destroy human colonies. The Crimson Empire of Maxia claimed human soldiers would run at the first sight of real warriors. Tay wrote it all down. Every threat, every insult, every promise of violence against human civilians. He filled page after page with careful observations about alien military capabilities, weaknesses in their arguments, and gaps in their logic. His training had taught him to read battlefields in seconds, and this political arena was just another type of battlefields. The session continued. The arguments grew more heated. Several species started making direct threats against human settlements. The Maxian war prince stood up in his red armor and declared that humans should stay in their own small corner of the galaxy, or face the consequences. His warriors behind him cheered and waved their energy weapons. The Void Hunter captain suggested that human cargo ships were too tempting as targets, and maybe fewer of them should be traveling the space lanes. The other Void Hunters laughed at this barely concealed threat. Everyone knew they were space pirates who attacked defenseless civilians. Through it all, Tay remained perfectly calm. He had learned patience during his military service when waiting for the perfect moment to strike often meant the difference between victory and disaster. He watched the aliens work themselves into a frenzy of aggression, while he calculated angles of attack and probable casualty rates. Day Hai noticed that Tay's fingers had started tapping a specific rhythm on his tablet. It was Morse code from his old military unit spelling out a simple message: target acquired. She felt a chill run down her spine because she knew that when Captain Kim identified a target, it usually ended up destroyed. The session finally ended with several delegations storming out in anger. The Crimson Empire declared that talks were pointless. The Void Hunters announced they would take what they wanted by force. The Granite Lords rumbled threats about showing humans what real strength looked like. As the aliens filed out, many of them deliberately bumped into Tay or stepped on his feet trying to show dominance. Each time he stepped aside politely and apologized in their own languages. His perfect pronunciation surprised them because most humans could barely manage basic galactic standard. They thought they had found an easy target in humanity. Peaceful representative. They were very, very wrong. Kay gathered his notes and walked slowly toward the exit. His diplomatic smile never wavered even as alien after alien tried to intimidate him. But Dahai could see something in his eyes that had not been there before. The diplomat was still there, but something else was waking up underneath. Something that had been sleeping for years was starting to stir. Something that had once turned impossible battles into crushing victories. Something that alien bullies were about to meet face to face. The quiet diplomat was about to remind the galaxy why humanity's greatest warriors often made the best peacekeepers, because they knew exactly what peace was worth and what it cost to maintain it. The attacks reached a level that shocked even the neutral species who had been watching from the sidelines. The Maxian Crimson Empire launched a full orbital bombardment of New Busan Colony, home to 3 million human civilians. The attack came without warning during the middle of the night when most families were sleeping. Massive energy beams from space turned entire city blocks into glass and ash. The death toll was horrifying. Over 500,000 humans died in the first hour, including children in schools and patients in hospitals. The survivors sent desperate messages begging for help, but the nearest human military base was 6 days away by the fastest ships. The Maxian fleet stayed in orbit for 3 more days hunting down escape pods and refugee convoys like it was some kind of sport. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian swarm attacked the research station at Kepler Prime, where human scientists were working on new medical treatments. The researchers had no weapons and no military training. They were doctors and biologists trying to cure diseases that affected dozens of species across the galaxy. The Zephyrians slaughtered them anyway, using their razor-sharp mandibles to tear apart anyone they found. The worst part was what the Zephyrians did to the medical samples and research data. They destroyed 20 years of work that could have saved millions of lives. The cure for Alteran crystal rot was lost. The treatment for Vrex blood poisoning was gone. The vaccine for the plague that had been killing Granite Lord children was wiped out completely. Emergency council sessions were called, but they accomplished nothing. The attacking species claimed they were defending themselves from human aggression. They showed doctored video evidence of human warships in their territory and fake communications about planned human attacks. The neutral species wanted to believe these lies because it was easier than admitting they had let genocide happen. Kim Tai stood before the council one final time to make humanity last diplomatic appeal. His voice was still calm and professional, but everyone could see something had changed in his eyes. The quiet diplomat who had taken insults and threats with polite smiles was gone. Something else was looking out from behind his face. He read aloud the names of human casualties from New Busan Colony. Dr. Park Soo-min, age 34, who had been working on cancer treatments. Captain Lee Young-ho, age 41, a cargo ship. Pilot with 2 small children. Engineer Kim Hae-jin, age 28, who designed water purification systems for refugee camps. The list went on for 20 minutes and the chamber fell completely silent. When he finished reading the names, Tai looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every alien representative present. He thanked them for their time and their honesty about how they viewed humanity. He said the human government had learned valuable lessons about who their friends were in this galaxy and who their enemies were. Then he made a simple statement that sent ice through Lee Dahai veins. My government has asked me to inform this council that all diplomatic relations are hereby terminated. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and cooperative arrangements with the species represented here today. The Maxian war prince stood up in his red armor and laughed. He said good riddance to the weak humans and made jokes about how they were running away, like cowards. The Zephyrian delegation buzzed with amusement, saying that natural selection was finally working properly. The Granite Lords rumbled with satisfaction that the soft species was leaving the galaxy to the strong, but Dahai noticed that Tay was not packing his belongings or booking transport back to Earth. Instead, he returned to his apartment and began making a very different kind of call. He contacted Admiral Park Jin-woo and gave authorization codes that had been locked away. For decades, emergency war powers were activated for the first time since the Proxima Rebellion. The aliens thought they had won. They began making plans to divide human territory among themselves. The Granite Lords wanted the asteroid mining systems. Around Sol the Void, hunters claimed the outer colonies with their rich mineral deposits. The Vrex demanded the agricultural worlds that fed billions of people. The Zephyrians buzzed about turning human research stations into new hive clusters. What they did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this possibility for over 50 years. Every human colony had hidden weapon stockpiles. Every civilian transport could be converted to military use in hours. Every peaceful research station contained enough firepower to level a city. The species that thought humans were weak had never seen them actually fight. Captain Song Hyo-jin received her activation codes while commanding a routine patrol near the outer rim. Her destroyer squadron looked like standard exploration vessels to any alien observers, but underneath the peaceful exterior were weapon systems designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses human intelligence had identified in every major alien military force. The Zephyrian swarm, confident in their overwhelming numbers, sent 3 full hive fleets to finish what they had started. They expected to crush any human resistance through sheer force of numbers. Their strategy had worked against every other species. They had encountered the hive mind could coordinate millions of individual fighters into perfect formation attacks. They had no idea they were flying into a trap. Captain Lee Jun-ho had been studying Zephyrian tactics for 20 years. He knew exactly how the hive mind would respond to different threats. He positioned his stealth ships along the predicted attack routes and waited for the enemy to come to him. When the Zephyrian fleets arrived, they found what looked like a small human patrol group, desperately trying to retreat. The hive mind ordered an immediate attack, confident that superior numbers would overwhelm the humans in minutes. The Zephyrians swarmed forward in their classic envelopment pattern, completely focused on their prey. Their ambush was perfect. Human ships that had been hidden behind asteroids and debris fields opened fire simultaneously. The Zephyrians had designed their tactics for fighting enemies who attacked from predictable directions. They could not adapt when death came from everywhere at once. The hive ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries became death traps for their own crews. Zephyrian warriors bred for swarm attacks found themselves isolated and confused when the hive mind fractured. Under multiple simultaneous strikes, the entire 3-fleet formation collapsed in less than an hour. Back on Council Station, the first reports of human military action began filtering in. The neutral species that had refused to help human civilians suddenly wanted to hold emergency meetings about peace negotiations, but their messages went unanswered. The time for talking was over. General Choi Min-soo activated sleeper cells that had been embedded in alien territory for decades. Human agents, who had posed as merchant scientists and diplomats for years, suddenly revealed their true purpose. Alien communication networks went down. Military supply depots exploded. Orbital defense platforms mysteriously malfunctioned. The Granite Lords, supremely confident in their individual combat prowess, declared they would personally crush the human rebellion. Their war king boasted that no granite warrior had ever been defeated in single combat. Their rock-hard skin could deflect energy weapons, and their massive strength could crush any opponent. They marched into battle expecting to face the same kind of weak humans they had been bullying in the council chamber. Instead, they met weapons designed specifically to turn their greatest strength against them: sonic disruptors that used the Granite Lord's own density to tear them apart from the inside, molecular acid that could eat through any mineral structure, gravity bombs that made their heavy bodies impossible to move. The proud warrior race that had dominated local space through brute force discovered that intelligence always defeats raw strength in the end. Their massive armies that had never known defeat were shattered by tactics they could not understand. Or Countertake continued his daily routine on Council Station as if nothing had changed. He ordered the same coffee from the same cafe. He read reports in the same observation deck. He even attended the same social gatherings. But now the other diplomats avoided him like he carried some deadly disease. They whispered among themselves about the human military victories that should have been impossible. They tried to understand how the weak species they had been mocking could be destroying their most powerful fleets. The fear in their eyes when they looked at Tay was something new and terrifying. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their tactics. It was their patience. They had endured insults and threats for decades while secretly preparing for the day when talking would no longer be enough. That day had finally come. The surviving alien fleets limped home to worlds that no longer felt safe. The mighty military forces that had terrorized the galaxy for generations were reduced to scattered remnants, hiding in their home systems, afraid to venture into deep space. The Maxian Crimson Empire, once the most feared navy in known space, was down to less than 50 functional ships, from a fleet that had numbered in the thousands. The formal surrender came through official diplomatic channels. The same governments that had laughed at human peace offers now begged for mercy. Their messages were filled with apologies and promises to never again threaten human civilians. They offered reparations, tribute payments, anything that might satisfy human demands for justice. The Zephyrian swarm was the first to break completely. Their hive mind had been traumatized by losses they never imagined possible. Millions of individual Zephyrians had died in battles they had been certain they would win. The collective consciousness that had coordinated their attacks now recoiled from any contact with human forces. The Zephyrian surrender document was signed by the Hive Queen herself, promising to seal all borders with human space and pay compensation to families of murdered civilians. The proud swarm that had boasted about natural selection and survival of the fittest was retreating to their home clusters like wounded animals. The Granite Lords faced the most humiliating defeat of all. Their entire culture was built around individual combat prowess and the belief that strength determined worth in the universe. Watching their greatest warriors being captured and imprisoned by humans who refused to fight fairly had shattered their worldview. General Thokmar, the same Granite Lord who had laughed at human casualties, was forced to personally sign reparation agreements. The proud warrior race that had never known defeat was now paying tribute to the species they had called weak. Their massive fortress worlds were occupied by human peacekeeping forces. The Void Hunters simply vanished from known space. Rather than face more hunter-killer teams, they abandoned their territory and fled to the Galactic Rim. Some individual pirates were eventually captured and tried for their crimes, but the organization that had terrorized merchant shipping for centuries was finished. In the council chamber, a new dynamic had emerged. When Ambassador Kim Tae spoke, everyone listened with desperate attention. His suggestions were no longer ignored or mocked. The same aliens who had once laughed at human diplomatic proposals now hung on every word, looking for signs of displeasure or approval. The Vrex ambassador, who had hissed with amusement at human peace offers, now spoke in careful, measured tones when addressing human concerns. The crystal beings from Altara maintained neutral colors throughout every discussion, afraid that showing the wrong emotion might trigger human anger. The insect-like representatives clicked their mandibles nervously whenever Tay looked in their direction, but Tay himself had not changed. He still spoke softly about cooperation and mutual benefit. He still offered peaceful solutions to conflicts between other species. He still maintained the same diplomatic smile that had puzzled aliens for years. The difference was that now everyone understood what lay beneath that calm exterior. Lida Hai watched from the observer section as Tai concluded negotiations with the Tau Ceti Mining Guild. The guild representatives who once would have dismissed human concerns without thought now agreed to every term without argument. They signed agreements to provide discounted rare metals to human colonies and to employ human workers at fair wages. After the meeting, she approached Tay in the corridor and asked him quietly if he enjoyed seeing the fear in alien eyes. He considered the question seriously, as he always did, then explained that fear had never been the goal. Respect was the goal. Peace was the goal. Safety for human families was the most important goal of all. He told her that for decades humanity had held back their true capabilities, hoping that reason and goodwill would be enough to ensure peaceful coexistence. They had chosen restraint not because they were weak, but because they understood the terrible cost of war. They had offered friendship to species who saw kindness as weakness, when forced to abandon that restraint they had revealed. Why evolution created predators who could choose to be protectors. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their tactics, but their willingness to hold back until holding back was no longer possible. The neutral species that had stood by during the genocide discovered that comfortable neutrality was a luxury they could no longer afford. Trade agreements were renegotiated on terms favorable to humanity. Defense pacts were canceled unless they included specific protections for human interests. The relationships they had taken for granted were now subject to human approval. The Altar and Crystal Confederation found their request for medical aid delayed pending review of their past cooperation with human initiatives. The Draconian Republic discovered that their application for expanded trade routes was being held up by human objections to their immigration policies. President Yoon Hai-jin had made it clear that humanity remembered who had stood with them when they needed help. The galaxy had taught humans valuable lessons about friendship and loyalty. Now those lessons were being applied to future relationships. Some species complained that humanity was being unreasonable, that the past should be forgotten in favor of moving forward peacefully. These complaints were answered by Ambassador Tay in his usual diplomatic manner. He explained that peace required trust, and trust had to be earned through actions, not words. The species that had attacked human civilians could earn redemption through reparations and reforms. The species that had remained neutral during genocide could earn partnership through demonstrated commitment to justice. The process would take time, because trust once broken was not easily repaired. The galactic economy adapted to the new reality. Human colonies that had been targets for pirates and raiders became major trade hubs under the protection of human naval forces. The safe passage that had once been provided by paying tribute to criminals was now guaranteed by human patrols. Shipping companies across the galaxy discovered that routes through human space were the safest and most profitable. The same merchant captains who had once feared human weakness now sought human protection. Human naval bases became preferred stops for cargo vessels carrying valuable goods. The cultural changes were even more profound. The species that had once viewed diplomacy as weakness now competed to hire human negotiators and mediators. The same aliens who had laughed at human peace offers now studied human diplomatic methods as examples of sophisticated statecraft. 48 hours after the first human military strikes, the galaxy began to understand the true scope of their mistake. The Maxian forward fleet that had been celebrating their victory over New Busan colony went completely silent. All communication ceased. Their last transmission was a brief emergency signal before everything went dark. When Maxian scout ships finally reached their fleet last known position, they found only debris fields and emergency beacons. The massive dreadnoughts that had bombarded human civilians were now twisted metal floating in space. The crews were gone, completely disappeared without a trace. The proud Crimson Fleet that had never lost a battle was simply erased from existence. Admiral Park Jin-woo led the human response fleet. But these were not the peaceful exploration vessels the galaxy had grown used to seeing. These were true warships that had been hidden in the outer systems for decades, built in secret shipyards using technology the aliens had never encountered. Each vessel was crewed by veterans who remembered every human colony that had been attacked. The ships looked different from anything aliens had seen before. They were longer and sleeker than the bulky designs most species preferred. Their hulls were covered in angles that seemed to bend light around them, making them hard to target. Their weapons were housed in retractable pods that could emerge from unexpected positions, but the real difference was in the crews. These were not the peaceful merchants and scientists the aliens expected. These were soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Many had lost friends or family in the recent attacks. They knew exactly what they were fighting for, and they would not be satisfied with anything less than total victory. The Void Hunters, who had been bragging about attacking defenseless human cargo ships, decided to show the galaxy how real pirates handled military targets. They assembled their largest raiding force in decades, over 200 ships crewed by the most vicious killers in known space. They had terrorized merchant fleets across the galaxy and never met resistance. They could not crush Captain Song Hyo-jin was waiting for them. Her destroyer, Squadron had been tracking the Void Hunter fleet for days using stealth technology that made human ships invisible to alien sensors. The pirates had no idea they were being watched and analyzed. Their every movement was recorded, their every weakness catalogued. The Void Hunters attacked what they thought was a small human convoy carrying supplies to a research station. They expected an easy victory against unarmed transports. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by ships that seemed to appear from empty space. The human vessels moved with precision that seemed impossible, coordinating attacks with split-second timing. The pirates discovered that their hit-and-run tactics meant nothing when the enemy could predict their every move. Human intelligence had been studying Void Hunter patterns for years. They knew exactly how the raiders would attack, where they would retreat, how they would try to escape. Every possible strategy had been analyzed and countered, one by one. The pirate ships were picked apart by weapons designed specifically to exploit Void Hunter weaknesses. Their stealth systems were useless against sensors that could track their engine signatures. Their speed meant nothing when human ships could anticipate their every maneuver. Their numbers were irrelevant when they could not coordinate effectively. The few surviving Void Hunter captains sent desperate messages describing encounters that seemed impossible. They reported human ships that moved like they could read minds, that set traps no one should have been able to predict, that fought like they knew every secret of Void Hunter technology. Meanwhile, the neutral species were discovering that staying out of the conflict was no longer an option. The Etwayan humans were not interested in territorial conquest or tribute payments. They wanted justice for murdered civilians, compensation for destroyed property, and absolute guarantees that such attacks would never happen again. President Yoon Hye-jin addressed the galaxy directly in a broadcast from Earth. Her message was transmitted on every frequency to every system in known space. The words were simple and clear. Humanity had tried peace and been answered with genocide. They had offered friendship and received betrayal. Now they would demonstrate why predators should fear prey that fights back. The alien governments began reaching out through secret channels, desperate to negotiate. Some offered reparations for the attacks, others promised to punish the military officers who had ordered strikes against human civilians. A few even suggested joint operations against the remaining hostile forces. But all these desperate messages were answered by the same person who had offered them peaceful solutions. Months earlier, Ambassador Kim Tae, who still spoke in the same calm, diplomatic voice. The difference was that now every alien leader knew exactly who they were really talking to. Intelligence reports had finally revealed Tae's military background. His service record read like something from a war legend, the Siege of Europa Station, where he held an impossible position for 3 days. The Battle of Titan Base, where he defeated forces 10 times larger than his own. The Proxima campaign, where his tactical genius ended a rebellion that had lasted 5 years. The quiet diplomat they had mocked and insulted was actually one of humanity's most decorated military commanders. The man who had patiently taken notes while they made threats was the architect of their destruction. His calm voice that had spoken of peace was the same voice that had commanded the bloodiest battles in human history. Tae's terms for ending the conflict were simple and non-negotiable. Complete withdrawal of all hostile forces from human space. Full reparations for all damages, including compensation to families of civilians who had been murdered. Formal acknowledgement of war crimes committed against human non-combatants. Public trials for military officers who had ordered attacks on defenseless targets. The alternative, he explained in the same polite diplomatic tone, was the complete systematic dismantling of their military capabilities. By force, human fleets would continue hunting down every ship that had participated in attacks against civilians. Every base that had supported anti-human operations would be destroyed. Every leader who had ordered genocide would face justice. Some species tried to argue that the terms were too harsh. They claimed that warfare always involved civilian casualties, and that humans were being unreasonable in demanding accountability. The Altaran Crystal Confederation suggested that perhaps both sides should forget the past and move forward peacefully. Tae's response was delivered with perfect diplomatic courtesy. He reminded them that human civilians had been specifically targeted, not caught in crossfire. The attacks on medical research stations and refugee transports were deliberate acts of terrorism, not military operations. The orbital bombardment of New Busan had been designed to maximize civilian casualties. He also reminded them that humanity had repeatedly offered peaceful solutions and had been answered with insults and violence. The galaxy had chosen to interpret human restraint as weakness and human diplomacy as cowardice. Now they would learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. The alien species that had seemed so powerful just weeks earlier were discovering that their military might was built on fighting weaker opponents. They had never faced an enemy that understood their tactics better than they did themselves. They had never encountered weapons designed specifically to counter their greatest strengths. The Crimson Empire of Maxia that had boasted about their invincible fleet watched helplessly as their remaining ships were hunted down one by one. The Zephyrian swarm that had relied on overwhelming numbers found their hive mind tactics useless against enemies who could predict their every move. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson about the difference between seeming weak and actually being weak. The humans had never been weak. They had simply been hoping that strength would not be necessary now that hope was gone and the real war had begun. The predators had finally met their match.